Whenever we read modern India books for UPSC, whether it is Spectrum or Bipin Chandra or any other book, we come across four terms: Regulating Act, Charter Act, Indian Councils Act, and Government of India Act. Now, these topics are very important as far as UPSC is concerned because every alternate year or very frequently one or two questions are being asked in prelims exam and sometimes in the mains exam. Now, what happens? The students or the aspirants of UPSC, they memorize the provisions of these acts and they try to solve the question in the prelims exam or in the mains exam, and they tend to make mistake there. Most of the students do not understand the basic meaning of the terms like Regulating Act, Charter Act, Indian Council Act, why they are called so. So without understanding, we tend to make mistake. So if we understand the basic meaning of these terms properly, we will have two benefits. First thing is we will be very clear in understanding the provisions of these acts. Second, we will be able to better memorize the content of these acts. So it will help us in our exam. Now, in this video, we are going to cover all these acts, their basic meaning, and why they are called so. Now, first point here, whether it is Regulating Act, Charter Act, Indian Councils Act, or Government of India Act, all these acts were passed in the British Parliament, not in any of the legislative structure in India. These acts were passed in British Parliament, right? So this is the first point we have to note down. All these acts were passed in British Parliament. Now, before we understand the basic meaning of these terms, whether Regulating Act, Charter Act, Indian Councils Act, or Government of India Act, let us cover the background of this. As all of us know, that East India Company came to India in 1600 AD for doing trade. The British Queen was having share or stakes in East India Company. She gave monopoly of trade to East India Company, that East India Company will do trade on eastern side of Cape of Good Hope. Whatever countries lies on the eastern side of Cape of Good Hope, like India, China, Southeast Asia, so only East India Company will do trade with these countries. No other company will be allowed to do trade with these countries. So now, what is charter? Charter is basically an order which is passed or which is issued by the government or the emperor of a country. Now, in this case, the British Queen issued an order that only East India Company will trade with the countries on the eastern side of Cape of Good Hope. No other company will be allowed. So, those acts which were passed by British Parliament to review the charter issued by the Queen, and if any revision has to be done in this charter or any extension of the monopoly of trade has to be done, such act which will review this charter and which will review the monopoly of East India Company, such act will be called as Charter Act. The examples are Charter Act of 1813, Charter Act of 1833. So in these acts, one of the provisions will always talk about the monopoly of East India Company. As we have seen in Charter Act of 1813, the monopoly of trade with India was abolished, but monopoly of trade with China and trade in tea was kept as it is. In Charter Act of 1833, the monopoly of trade in tea as well as with China was also abolished. So as far as Regulating Act is concerned, we will again go back to 1600 AD. As we know, East India Company came as a traders company or mercantile company in India to do trade. So from 1600 AD onwards, next 100, 150 years, East India Company kept on doing trade and earned lot of profit. Now, because of this monopoly, the other companies in Britain, they were getting jealous. Why East India Company is allowed to earn so much of profit? Now, that jealousy is already there, and which was putting pressure in British Parliament, which was putting pressure on the British Queen. Now, here in India, two battles happened. In 1757, Battle of Plassey. In 1764, Battle of Buxar. After these two battles, accidentally British East India Company got control of Bengal region. British East India Company started getting revenue from this area, started getting tax from this area. Generally in the books we will read the term that British East India Company got the Diwani rights of Bengal region. So what is Diwani rights? British East India Company will get tax from the people apart from their normal business. British East India Company is a business company or a trading company. It's a private company. Now, because of these circumstances, they will get the tax from the people. Now, this wealth that they got from tax as well as trade was very huge. The officers of East India Company, they started misappropriating this wealth. They got involved in the corruption. They started manipulating this money. And what happened? They were showing East India Company in loss even though they were earning crores of rupees. Now, again, because the other companies there in Britain, they were jealous, they were not earning so much of profit, and they knew the truth that the officers of East India Company are making a lot of money, but they are showing the company in loss. So they put huge pressure in Britain that the corruption of East India Company has to be controlled. Now, the British Parliament came up with multiple acts through which they will try to control the affairs of British East India Company in India. They will try to control the corruption of East India Company. They will try to regulate the affairs of East India Company. So, as the British Parliament proposed these bills to regulate the affairs of East India Company in India, that's why these acts are called as Regulating Act. Now, we have seen the examples: Regulating Act of 1773, Regulating Act of 1784, which is also called as Pitt's India Act. So, this is the meaning of Regulating Act. So, through these acts, British Parliament want to regulate commercial as well as political affairs of East India Company. Before we understand Indian Council Acts, we should understand three basic terms: legislature, executive, and judiciary. Legislature is the body which makes laws for a country. Executive is the body which implements those laws or executes those laws. And judiciary is the body which interpret those laws and do justice. If any conflict is there, it will resolve that conflict by interpreting the law properly or the constitution properly. Now, let us go back to East India Company again. Once they got hold of Bengal region, they realized that it is a very nice way. Apart from our normal trade, we are getting tax, which is huge amount from this region. So why not capture other areas? So after capturing Bengal, after taking over Bengal region, the British East India Company tried to take over various other regions. And over the years, we will see that British East India Company will take over Mysore, British East India Company will take over Maratha region, and they will take over Punjab region, similarly various other regions. And they will earn huge profit, they will earn huge tax. Initially, these captured territories or these taken over territories were administered by certain officers. Those officers were known by different names from time to time. Initially, they were called as governors, Governor General of India, and even later on, they were known as viceroys. These governor generals, they were managing the Indian territories through a committee which was an executive committee. So this committee was assisting them in making some rules, making some laws to govern India. It was only in 1853 one exclusive legislative council was formed which will frame laws for India. So, law making in certain aspects of governance in India started from 1853 onwards. Similarly, in the provinces also, legislative councils were formed under various governors. Now, these legislative councils, they have different type of membership. There were two type of members. One were official members, another one non-official members. The official members were mostly Britishers, almost all Britishers, and they were nominated by the British Parliament and the Governor General. Now, non-official members, most of the non-official members were Indians. These non-official members were also of two types. One was nominated members, another one was elected members. The nominated members were nominated by Governor General of India. Now, the Governor General of India will nominate only such people who will be loyal to the British Crown, who will be loyal to the British government. But the elected members, they will come through the voting of the Indians. It means the Indian people will vote and they will elect the elected members. So non-official membership, one is nominated members, another one is elected members. So now, what will be the tendency of the British government? British government will try to have more and more official members who are Britishers. It means the British government will try to have official majority. But Indians will put pressure that there should be non-official members. There should be more non-official members, or there should be non-official majority. So Indian organizations like Indian National Congress and other nationalists, they were putting pressure on the British government that in the legislative councils, more and more non-official members should be there. Indian Council Acts are those acts which will talk about Indian legislative councils, their membership, number of members, and who will be the member, how the member will be, whether it will be elected member or the nominated member. We have seen the example Indian Council Act of 1861, Indian Council Act of 1892, Indian Council Act of 1909. As we know, you can take example of Indian Council Act of 1909. Under this act, in 1909, separate electorate was proposed by the British government. It means Muslim population will only vote for the Muslim candidate. Similarly, element of direct election came from the Indian Council Act of 1909. The Council Act of 1861, 1892, they were talking about the non-official membership of the legislative councils. So these are the examples of Indian legislative councils. Now, as we know, India was the colony of Britain. So any law which was passed by British Parliament to govern or to administer the colonial India, all such laws were called as Government of India Act. Ideally, we can call all the acts right from Regulating Act of 1773 to India's Independence Act of 1947. All these acts can be called as Government of India Act. But specifically from the Charter Act of 1833 or St. Helena's Act or Government of India Act 1833, we will start calling these acts as Government of India Act. Why? Because from this act onwards, the post of Governor General of India was created by the British Parliament. This post was created to officially administer or govern the Indian territory, to officially set up a government in Indian territory. That's why it is called as Government of India Act. So from 1833 to 1935 or 1947, we call all these acts as Government of India Act. Sometimes some of the acts, for example, the Act of 1909, it is also called as Indian Council Act of 1909. It is also called as Government of India Act 1909. So one act can be called with multiple names. So this is all about the acts during the British rule which were framed by the British Parliament. We will stop it here. Before we stop here, let me read a quote from Thomas Jefferson. Most bad government has grown out of too much government. So this is the quote of Thomas Jefferson. Think about it. What is the meaning of this quote? What he wants to say? If you have any other query, you can contact us on the numbers given at the end. You can ask us on those numbers if any other video or any other conceptual video has to be made. We'll try to make video on that topic. Thank you very much.